our 12th Regenerate Now Farmer in the Field. This Farmer in the Field is part of a bigger program of making education around regenerative agriculture, particularly through a small-scale horticultural projects, as accessible to everyone as possible who wants to turn their photosynthesis opportunity into a climate change, food security, job-producing opportunity. I'm Sarah Smuts-Kennedy. I'm an artist. I'm the vision holder for the Love of Bees and Regenerate Now, and a co-creator of Urban Farmers Alliance. And today we have Levi and myself are going to be running this mentoring session as Daniel is unwell. And it's a bit like being back in the old gang, isn't it, guys? The three of us worked with Anna and For the Love of Bees for between 2017 and 2018. So we have been actually learning together, contributing to each other's learning and contributing to the wider learning. So it is tremendously exciting, Anna, to be in an opportunity where you have since left Auckland and gone to live on your own piece of land. I've been aware of the dreams that you've had for being able to become really productive up in the far north, and to be able to contribute to your the community that you're moving into in regards to the education that you've been doing. So I'm so looking forward to seeing your project. We won't be able to help you with the soil today because that really is something that only Daniel at this stage in our community can help you with, but we're hoping to be able to use some other exciting Instagram strategies to give you a one-on-one with him later in the week while you're doing your Instagram takeover. So Levi, do you want to take it from here? And then Anna, will go to you, and we'll start with, if you can give us a brief idea of where you are, how big it is, and where you're at with your project to get us started.
Thanks, Sarah. Kia ora all. Nice to see you, Anna. My name's Levi. I'm the head farmer at one of the For Love of Bees main sort of growing sites. It's called OMG, Organic Market Garden, urban farm in the middle of Auckland City. Yeah, we grow for CSA boxes, and yeah, I've been really experimenting with lots of different planting techniques, and super cool to be here, super cool to see your project, and wasn't that long ago that you were helping me out, so it's super cool to be here.
Well, kia ora everybody, my name is Anna Dadson. As Sarah mentioned, I moved to Kirikiri in December, just been. Simon and I bought an acre 3 years ago, and we've been developing an off-grid home here and have had some minor garden interventions in that time. But now that we've moved here fully, we've done a subdivision, acquired another 1/4 of an acre, which is a mature persimmon orchard. So the objective here is to develop a very productive garden on this current site that we're standing, which is only approximately 100 square meters. And I'll talk you through it soon, but I just want to communicate what my objectives now can teach me so I can put it into practice, because I'm starting up a design and consultation business, and I want to communicate all my learnings and to educate and start up right now community, well, kind of exist in Kirikiri. And I'm really interested in experimenting with syntropic guilds. Simon and I enter trade. There's a really rich trading culture in Northland. Started joining the Time Bank, which is quite excited about, is developing my nursery so that I can grow that to client, and that I'll be able to trade with others. So, and that'll include edibles and perennials for beauty. So I wanted to show you the new garden that we've established already, queries about, and already some things I've not quite made it on. So your feedback would be most welcome. We've been collecting a lot of cardboard, and this whole area that you can see over here with all the 2-year-old mulch and soil dug from holes in is all sheet mulched. I have in the making a hugel culture garden and one kind of raised bed with no edges, planting with a green manure crop, Roman chamomile, some onions, and just made a little keyhole bed. Attempting to grow some broad beans, which you can see are very, very lacking in nutrients. Really, I haven't added much at all to the soil. And we have some established fruit trees as well, which I'm beginning to plant around. But nothing is really taken like I hoped it would, because I really haven't added much to the soil. I had available to me like some gypsum, rock dust, cow manure. I've just recently collected some seaweed. These are the kind of inputs, vermicast, but really it's just not sufficient. So I put a soil test together, which Daniel will be feeding back to me on, that Eurofins did. So I've been really waiting for his input to know what amendments I need to apply.
Can I ask you a question, Anna? So the sheet mulching that you've done there has quite a significant amount of wood chip mulch in it, doesn't it?
How's the reception on that?
Levi looks frozen.
Oh dear. Shall we move to the next spot?
What
were you indicating?
I just thought you might want to refer to Kylie's garden.
Oh, I haven't really asked permission to do that, so.
All right.
Anna, while you're walking, can you hear me?
So where are we going?
So we're going to the first garden that I started developing 3 years ago, which was a herb garden, because herbs are the first thing that I like to plant because I love them a lot.
Levi still looks frozen, by the way.
No,
Okay, shall
Levi's
we
not
wait
frozen,
for
but we
them
don't
to catch
have
up and see?
we
You
don't
some
have
feedback, or you can't hear anything?
So I can't hear anything at your end. I'm just wondering if I'm frozen or...
Oh, I can read text. We can hear you.
Okay.
we can hear you, but we can't see you. Okay.
I'm just going to wait for you to respond at this point. Just
They have responded with text.
just that. Okay.
We can hear you.
Okay. So I've been expanding this garden. So during lockdown,
I can't see you.
Pardon?
We can't see you.
Oh dear.
Levi's disappeared.
Oh dear.
I'll get the phone to you.
Okay.
I suppose it's because you can't really text with everybody joined in, which is another factor, isn't it?
Okay. If we can go to the first garden where reception was better.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for okay. And Levi's going to go to
Levi says
Wi-Fi.
go to Wi-Fi. We don't have Wi-Fi.
Yeah. So Anna, can you hear me? Levi, can you hear me?
I can hear you,
still
Sarah.
I can't
Okay,
see
great.
anybody.
So,
Whereas
It doesn't work if you can't hear us.
Yeah, this is the nature of
perhaps ask you
Mr. Weber. Can you hear me talking now?
Yes.
Really sorry.
We'll see. Yeah.
Can
Okay,
you
they
hear
can
us?
hear you.
But
Okay.
you can't see me?
so what I'm thinking,
I'm waiting on
Anna,
an
is that
answer to that. I don't think they can see you
no.
because it's
Oh,
black
dear.
at this end. Sign out and sign in again.
So Levi,
Yes.
I have actually asked Anna prior to the event about the mulch because one of the big questions was for her is she's not getting the results, and what had actually transpired, and obviously she'll be able to affirm this when she comes back and she can hear us, is that she'd actually used quite a lot of wood
Can you grab me an
chip.
umbrella while you're at it? There should be one at
And-
the back door.
Yeah, and so
Looks like a very dark wood chip.
yes, and as I was saying to so I've had a word to Daniel just to kind of get confirmation on my thinking, is that, you know, the wood chip is still massively high in carbon, and
Yeah.
so you're looking at in some instances 1 to 600, and you know, the best growing environment is when you have a 1 to a fungi bacteria ratio of 1 to 1, and obviously the fungal networks really only start to kick in around 5 or 10, maybe 30 to 1. So and obviously the gypsum, she's put in gypsum, she's put in worm castings, worm juice, some rock dust, some fish, Yates fish and seaweed fertilizer. But really the gypsum is for a very specific environment, and people often put it in thinking that it's quite good for calcium, but actually pure lime is actually better. But really what she's looking at is, which actually tends to be a mistake that many of us who particularly got a permaculture sensibility, we often go in and the first thing we're trying to do is to suppress the kikuyu grass, and we're using cardboard, which is, you know, has a relatively high carbon content, and then a mulch that is often, which is very different to a compost. So you're slowing the process down, and it's going to take some time for that to you know, process enough, like quite some time for that mulch to turn into a ratio of carbon to nitrogen that's good for growing you know, your annuals. And that the broad beans that have gone in, while they are nitrogen fixing, the nitrogen doesn't become available you know, for plants until it is either being processed through the belly of an animal or mulched. So and I think, you know, a number of the Dignan Street Community Garden have had the same issue with going in on top of a bowling green and putting a lot of wood chip down, and then actually having to work backwards from that point, whereas potentially the soil itself might have been not so bad, not in such bad shape. We obviously can't have confirmation of that because we don't have the soil test results, but you know, that is a mistake that many of us make. So what are your thoughts on that, Levi?
I would never recommend putting mulch down to establish a garden, full stop. And the reason for that is that I've witnessed myself mulch just killing plants. I think it's a good idea, and it really blows me away how many people recommend it as a strategy. And ultimately, I'm sure Daniel would say the same. Mulch doesn't grow healthy soil. Living plants grow healthy soil, and that's what we're all about. Mulch is capturing. It's not capturing carbon. It's not feeding the soil systems. And really, to me, the best way to establish a new garden is by planting plants into it. Yeah, somehow getting a suppression on all the weeds. But yeah, the whole conversation around wood chip mulch depends entirely on the species of tree that it was, how mature that tree is it softwood, is it hardwood, what state it's in, how long it's been sitting there for. It's actually quite a complex thing. It's not just like, oh, chuck the mulch on. Commonly, like if I was to use mulch, that mulch would have had to have been aged for quite a long time, looking at least a year. And yeah, I have used it in the paths of my garden bed, which I think has been good. I don't think it's had that effect of sucking out the nitrogen, because that's the main thing that I've witnessed time and time again with wood chip mulch, is that when you put it on, your plants start to go yellow, and you block a certain something that's happened in the soil system. And
so
yeah,
what we're talking about there is carbon. There's the soluble carbon that the plants need, and then there's the insoluble carbon, which is locked up in the mulch. And the soluble carbon, which is what Levi's talking about, that helps plants grow, is actually generated through photosynthesis, and it's actually the sap. So the plants are producing sap during the day, which is then becomes an exudate at the end of the day. That is then feeding the microbials, and that's the soluble carbon that we're trying to grow. So I've had I started my garden in a very similar scenario to Anna, however, and I used with the kikuyu, where I did use the cardboard and you say mulch and then compost, but the compost was put onto the cardboard and planted into, and the mulch stayed on the paths. What was that? Yeah, so mulch was on the paths. And I've done that over almost 400 square meters. So it's a considerable size site. And one of the strategies is to limit the amount of edges. So as soon as you have an edge, that kikuyu is going to come from the outside into the inside. So the planning of that garden has been done. And again, we don't have Anna. Why we're doing so much talking, everyone, is that we don't yet have Anna back. But this is recorded, and so we do have her questions, and we'll just continue to sort of go through them until she comes back. But so one of the strategies I've done on my own property is to really only have two edges, where in fact actually one edge where the kikuyu is present, and the rest of it is around a driveway or the house or the bush. So, and I've been able to, out of that particular garden, the kikuyu is still only an issue on one edge, and it's quite a limited edge, and I have to give my attention to that. So some of her questions were around strategies for getting rid of kikuyu grass. Do you have anything else to say around that, Levi?
Kikuyu, yeah, it's one of the better grasses to have. That's my belief. It's relatively easy to hand weed. Call me mental, but it's relatively easy to hand weed. And then once you hand weed it, you dry it out. You've got a lovely carbon source for compost piles. But exactly as you said, Sarah, basically if you hand weed it, it doesn't produce seeds. I don't think I've ever seen it flower, but the main way that it grows is from its root nodules. Any nodule of that grass can shoot up, so it's divisible just infinitely, really. But if you weed it out of your center, I'd say that's why I always start with a point and then go outwards, and you just make sure that you've got your clean edges, and it's nowhere in the middle. Then the only way it's going to come into your garden is from the edge. Exactly as you've said, Sarah. we basically just hand weeded it at OMG for how long would it have taken us? I reckon about 9 to 12 months, and then sort of in that later mark, it'd only be a couple of kikuyus here and there, but around the edges. The other thing as well is having really strong border plants with big taproots. We've at the farm at OMG, when we first did it, I was like, okay, we're doing rows of comfrey, which, looking back on it, is a sweet little strategy, because a row is very manageable, and when you have a big clump of comfrey, it just takes over, and it's just this comfrey thing. But if you got it in a line, what I've found is it's quite close together, and the roots don't have crazy runners, but it actually forms like an underground barrier. Comfrey kikuyu won't actually travel through that. So I just look at that, living plants that have quite strong, deeply rooted root structures that you can plant in a line around it, that don't spread. Most importantly, they don't spread, and then that will form your living barrier. Because the more that we go into this, you can put in physical interventions into your landscape. Say you could do a border. The worst thing to do with kikuyu is a border. I like a wooden border. That is like the number one thing that would just going to give you so many headaches. I've seen so many raised garden beds just riddled with kikuyu, because they love the cracks, they love the edges. So really, we got to be looking at what species can we plant to actually block that off, and they'll be doing so much more than mulch or a physical edging or rocks. Or we need to start looking into these things.
So what you're talking about is the introduction of perennials into the system, and I think that's another. Lots of people have been currently going up and looking at the Clausen Frieda Lott's synthropic farming system, which is truly tremendous, and they're looking at the introduction of perennials. And I agree with you, Levi. I've used on one of my boundaries or borders tansy, for example. So the introduction of tansy, rosemary, I guess you could be using lavender, and then comfrey, and you've got these multi-layered perennials on your boundaries. But also what you're doing is you're creating a really great diversity of biomass that you can crop very vigorously to be using for your composting, for example. So and I've got mine. I noticed that Anna has a very flat site, so she doesn't have, say, for example, a hillside with a drive like I do. So I also use those perennial bound borders to stop too much lying off my line driveway coming into the garden. So some of the other, she did ask a question around perennials, and I guess what are your thoughts? Because I know Levi, you have done the course as well, and I'm interested in, we're doing a very different type of market gardening, and I would like to think that we're doing synthropic market gardening, in a sense that we're absolutely focused on sap production and this pulsation of sap through very quick cycles of annuals. But we are also integrating, I know in my garden I have quite a lot of perennials, like the artichokes, Jerusalem artichokes. Again, I use rosemary. Parsley is not a perennial, but it is biennial. So actually looking at certain species that will give you really good root depth that over a couple of seasons. We still don't have Anna back, so let's just keep having this conversation, Levi. So what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think I actually don't, there's limited perennials that I have experience growing with. The ones that I love are the artichokes that you mentioned, the globe artichoke and the Jerusalem artichoke, which will both grow very happily, just straight with grass around it. They don't care about kikuyu, which is quite amazing to be doing that. But yeah, both of them really deeply rooted. And in Anna's context as well, those are really sought after plants, really easy to propagate from. The globe artichoke can be propagated from the divisions that it makes. It'll flower it'll grow once as one plant, and then the next season it'll pop up a whole lot of little suckers, and you can actually very carefully just pop them off, and then boom, you've got a $5 seedling there, and
Yes,
it's
it's
producing
true.
you it time and time again. And if you can get them established, like, man, just get them established. Anything that's actually going to produce a niche crop, as well as build soil very, very well, because it's really quite a lovely carbon mulch producer, as well as being quite a big plant, deeply rooted. You can get a crop from it. You can produce seedlings from it. Jerusalem artichokes, another one exactly like that. I actually really want. It's the first thing I'd do if I had a paddock like Anna's there. That's exactly what I'd be doing, and I wouldn't be just doing 5 of them. I'd be doing 200, and just do them in a line. It's so easy. It's not that hard to propagate 200 globe artichokes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I'm in the process of doing that myself at the moment, and they're a fantastic medicinal plant as well. So it's really wonderful to be thinking about plants, not just you're thinking about their sap production, their root, how they're breaking up the soil, thinking about them as biomass for compost, thinking about them as shade in terms of a weed control strategy, but then starting to think about food for yourself, food for pollinators, and then potentially medicine. So if you can actually get all of those things from multiple plants. So the other thing that she could be doing, for example, I noticed, like Anna, there's only myself and my partner really working on our property, whereas at OMG, of course, you have multiple volunteers. So the labour hours become quite different. So, but there are still ways to, for example, using clover or quick things that can actually get you a really good cover very quickly, that are enable you to building a soil system in your because also one of the other things is that if the scale of your garden, and one of the questions that Anna has is that she wants to get to as quickly as possible, not having to buy in inputs, and one of the biggest inputs can often be your compost. So you need a little bit of compost to begin your process if you're going to be doing it no-till, but then very quickly you can get to using homeopathic quantities of compost, where you're actually using your sap production. So you're actually using the sap production from plants to continually keep that soil dynamic. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Levi?
I'm sorry, I was a little bit lost on my own tangent. Then could you just repeat that again?
Yes. So so Anna's looking at very quickly trying to get to a system that is self-generating. So she's producing a lot of the fertility internally. So she has questions about what she should be purchasing now to fast track her getting to as quickly as possible a space where she is self-sufficient. And one of the big things for that you need to produce is compost. And while compost is really critical at kind of kick-starting that soil system so that you've got your annuals, growing as so that they're pest resistant, so they're really nutrient dense. You want to be, what are the strategies for going from, massive compost inputs to homeopathic qualities of compost, where you're using the plant itself to actually stimulate and keep that soil dynamic? So what are some of the strategies around that, Levi?
Obviously, compost, number one thing you should be doing. Compost and living plants. That's how we got the farm established. It was digging out massive rocks out of the soil, and then straight after we'd done any kind of digging or weeding, it was sow a cover crop straight away, immediately. as I do it more and more and more and more, I think it'd be interesting to see Anna's soil tests, see if the soil needs I'd like a decent amount of organic matter. Like if it needs, you know, a 10 centimeter block of compost everywhere, then that's like obviously an initial investment that you make in your soil in the early days. But if the organic matter levels are sitting at a point where you can get that garden started, and it's not going to, you're not going to be too impeded in starting that. And obviously Anna has time. You can increase the organic matter levels in your soil through growing very vigorous plants. And as you said, Sarah, the ability of plants to capture that carbon is dependent on how many diverse microbes you have in the soil, because they're going to grow you healthier plants and of greater vigor that are simply going to produce more carbon, and that they're going to capture more carbon and feed that into the soil.
So one of your strategies then is to never leave that soil bare, right?
Never.
Yeah. Oh, here they come. So we'll allow you to try and join us. We've got a question from Prashanti. Do you put plants, let's have a look. What is the question? Do you put plants on the surface of your garden to compost in situ? I'm not quite...
Like chop and drop. Like,
chop and drop.
that's, yeah, I use chop and drop a lot.
All blurry.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. I use that extensively, and that's something that Anna I know she uses and practices it a lot too, because sometimes you don't want to haul everything away and compost it all. Yeah.
Slugs and snails like it in there. Look, my feeling with the slugs and the snails is that they like a carbon heavy environment, so compost that hasn't properly broken down, whereas like fresh grass clippings, yeah, fresh grass clippings, which are an absolute amazing mulch for the garden. One of their great, they have a very brilliant nitrogen to carbon ratio, but they also breed bacteria, and the bacteria, bacteria breeds very quickly in it, and bacteria are very good protozoa food, and protozoa eat bacteria, and earthworms eat protozoa. So they're actually a brilliant way for kickstarting your garden bed. This it's very different to not very well broken down, compost, for example, which you do tend to get quite a lot of slugs and snails around. I haven't had that experience with, for example, grass clippings or your chop and drop. That's a very leafy chop and drop. What are your thoughts on that, Levi? And then I think we should get back to Anna, who's still looking a little bit foggy on her camera. But should we just let you answer that question, Levi, and then we'll move on to Anna?
Yeah. Read the slugs and snails.
Yeah. With the chop and drop.
Yeah, I find that they just as much like to live underneath living plants as they do a chop and drop plant. We go around all our lettuces and all the base of anything, the base of comfrey. They love to live in it. So I don't worry about them too much. I try not to. You've got to get out there on the full moon and do night raids to get them. Are you there, Anna?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Right.
It's just decided to rain torrentially.
Oh, okay, cool.
Well, so we've come inside.
Cool.
Great.
We're only 7 kilometres from Kikuyu, but we're in a hole.
Oh, that's good. We've been answering lots of your questions, just Sarah and I.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Oh, I look forward to watching back to learn about what they are.
Any more to be expanded upon. I think that last question you had, the last question we were talking about, is we only sort of got to the surface of that. It's a really good idea that we.
Oh, what
keep
was that?
doing that.
Which one?
Could you read it out, Sarah?
The one about the mulching.
Yeah, well, I guess it's quite handy to talk about like your time, Anna, and we were talking about compost requirements and how you wanted to limit these, continual investments.
Oh,
As
yeah.
that's a really nice place to start.
So okay, so we'll go back to that. We actually did a little bit of analysis of your why your first garden bed isn't actually functioning. You can go back and have a look at that more in depth, but essentially you put all sorts of stuff in there, so it's a real kind of chuck everything in. Many of those things absolutely fabulous.
Yeah, I know, no science.
Yeah, no science. Didson, for example, has a very specific use, and if you're looking for calcium, you're better just to use lime and not the gypsum. But really, one of your major issues will be that the mulch that you've used, the wood chip mulch that you've used, will be very high in carbon, and it'll be really slowing that whole system down. What we're really looking at, and it's a real permaculture, it's a trip that happens a lot with those of us who are following a permaculture kind of sensibility, where we go in and we put the wood chip down, which is fine in parts, but actually is going to make it really hard for you to grow in. And we're looking at trying to get soluble carbon, not the carbon, not insoluble carbon, which is what is in your wood chip, depending on what kind of tree it is. So the insoluble carbon that you're wanting is actually sap, which is generated from photosynthesis. So where we ended up in the second question is that, you've got your kikuyu, which you're wanting to get rid of. So we've done a reasonable conversation around, you've been to my property. I have 400 square meter garden that I've managed to use just cardboard and compost, or cardboard and mulch, depending on whether it's a path or a garden bed. But your compost is a big component to enabling your garden. And obviously there's you and Simon. And so, getting a compost at scale continuously at your property is going to be, potentially challenging. So we were talking around getting very quickly for you your initial compost, and so cardboard just straight on your grass, your cardboard, and then 10 centimeters of compost, planting as densely as you possibly can into that, whether it's to get a living cover of plants that are going to be pushing soluble carbon into that soil system every day, really starting to invigorate, really remediate the soil. And that cover cropping can be food, because actually microbes don't care whether or not a cover crop is a food, or whether it's a traditional cover crop like a mustard or a buckwheat, and then starting to build on that. So the question was, how would you, as quickly as possible, get to, needing 10 centimeters of compost across quite a vast area to get yourself started, into using homeopathic quantities of compost and using plants as much as possible to be doing the work for you? And what are the kind of systems that you would be implementing? We also have had a conversation around perennials and annuals, so we'll get back to that. But should we jump in there? Is that something that you're interested in talking about, Anna, and learning about?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Just to summarize just a couple of things with that mulch, just real quickly, it's handy for everyone, is basically putting any kind of mulch on, you're putting so much carbon into that system, and it overloads it. And you can look at our conversation we had before on it, but I have done it before, where you use the mulch to kill off the grass. It's a nice strategy to do that. After a year or 2 years, there's plenty of earthworms in it. But what you do have is you have a little topsoil there that is quite fungal dominant, and it's not mycorrhizal fungi, it's the decomposing fungi that get stuck in the surface. But it's good. It'll get rid of your kikuyu, and it'll get rid of other things over a long period of time if you happen to have the ability to get however many cubes of mulch delivered for free, like if that's a resource that you have. But what I've done before is I've used it to kill everything off, and then you want to scrape that stuff all the way back. You want to get rid of that rather than try and work with it. And like, you know, those broad beans that were stunted, you can just throw compost at that mulch. You can throw the best compost, and all that mulch will do is just eat it up. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So should I just rake it all out and
rake it all out? Get to the bottom.
Use it out somewhere else.
Yeah, you'll see where it hit the soil. Yeah. Put it into the path, or put it rake it somewhere else, I guess. Put it on another thing where you want to kill the grass off. You can do that. You can just move it patch to patch, but I wouldn't be trying to work with that much compost up. Just mulch, dense carbon to start with. And then we talked about.
Can I remediate it at all by adding topsoil to it?
I've done that to great success. That's a strategy we've used at the farm a lot. Yes. Toadstools.
Compost it, someone's saying.
Yeah. I was just saying, there was a question there about the mushrooms on the wood chip mulch. Yeah, most of those mushrooms you see are decomposing fungi. They're feeding on the carbon and breaking it down, and that's what you want if you want to break down wood chip mulch. There's a bunch of interesting mushroom inoculums that eat it up as well.
You want to be careful with putting too much of the tree. I mean, it really depends what kind of tree mulch it is, putting it into your compost. I mean, you know, if it's a soft pop like a poplar, those sorts of things, absolutely no problem. It breaks down at the same rate as, you know, your more nitrogen heavy materials. But, you know, you could get into the other end of the spectrum as pururi, won't break down. So, you know, it's not a simple question. You are planting trees. You've got a fruit tree area that you're going to be doing. You could easily use that mulch in and around your fruit trees. And then if you're putting your kind of rosemary or tansies or stuff like that, they won't, it's more your annuals that really, it's just going to be too hard to get started in.
Okay, it's great to have cleared that up. Learning the hard way.
Well, look, it's actually a great way because, you know, it's nothing like, you know, you hear it from us, but actually you kind of got to see the evidence yourself. So it's fantastic. You've done an experiment, and you've seen it, and that will be embedded in your mind. And as somebody who's committed to teaching, it's a really great experience for you to have clocked in.
I've ruined so many gardens through putting mulch on. So many. I've killed them, and that's why I don't use it anymore. Unless it's, as I said, putting it on an area that's leaving it for a couple of years, then rake it back, put topsoil or compost on it and plant into it, and stuff will grow really well. Leave that little, you'll notice there'll be about a centimetre where the wood chip has met the soil, which will have, it'll be darker centimetre. There might be a couple of chunks of mulch in it that are looking white with fungi. They're awesome. It's just that top chunk, you want to get it out. Yeah. But in terms of establishing new garden beds, we just had a conversation around constantly having the need to add in stuff. It's about being really selective with what plants you grow, and utilizing plants and different species to do that work for you. Yeah.
So you've got your, you've been to my place, Anna, you've seen my garden beds around, which in terms of dealing with the kikuyu, about 400 square meters, one of the areas. So it's actually about trying to design as few edges as possible. So actually like looking at your overall design and going, you know, where do I have a driveway? You know, how can I limit my edges, which is where your kikuyu will continue to do your head in. And then actually coming up with strategies for those edges. I've used a house on one side, bush on another, and a driveway. And we were also talking about using perennial plants to actually, you know, create a barrier. And Levi has done that with comfrey. I've done it sometimes with tansy, doing it with rosemary, potentially globe artichokes. And actually you get multiple benefits in that you actually got this sort of edge of really deep, thick roots, great cover in terms of the kikuyu can't survive without sunlight, but also you've got a complexity of biomass for when you're wanting to create composts. So I would be looking in your environment is looking at, you know, what is my square meterage? How much compost do I want to be producing a year? And what are my strategies for creating as much biomass as possible that's really easy for me to harvest in 10 to 15 minutes, for example. So growing for biomass for composts.
Anna, I'd look at it. I've dreamed for a long time of being in your situation where you have a bit of land to play with. And I've always been of the belief, like, compost making in general can be really annoying when you have a specific zone that you do it in, and you have to just chop and move so much material around to build your pile. That I think is like a really important design decision. Where are you getting your carbon from? Ideally, you're getting that from your site, from plants that are growing it. What species do you have that are going to grow you your carbon, because they're going to make you the best compost, because there's going to be compost grown from plants that have grown in your soil. But also think about where those compost piles are going to be, because it makes sense that you're composting right in the heart of where you want your greatest fertility in your garden to be. So in the middle of your veggie patch is where I'd be doing it. And really you could look at it as being multiple zones where you plant certain grasses or you know, really fast biomass producing things that are growing right next to your composting area where you're making that compost. So you're not having to move them that far, but at the same time and also at the end of the day, when you're moving your compost out, you're not shoveling it down a hill. You know, you want to just be moving it out from where it already is, and then by doing that and immediately replacing that with plants, because compost will, where it's built, it will kill off the plants, but then it's an amazing, like, you put that much compost on like even a semi-weeded or you know, it doesn't have to be completely weeded bed, and it will have the shading out effect, and you can get plants off to a really good head start. It's an awesome way to do it. But I'd look at where are you going to do your composting, and like to just drop the idea that maybe you have 10 compost zones, you know.
There's absolutely, it's absolutely true that the soil building, there's nothing that builds soil as quickly as a compost pile underneath that. You know, wherever you've built that pile, the earth really transforms extremely quickly. But I'm also thinking for you in terms of, are you, Anna, in terms of your production, are you looking at potentially, you know, you've got here, what are the things that you might need to buy? So these are some of the other questions you have in terms of getting started. And one of my questions I have are you going to be growing a lot of stuff from seed? Because again, this is another way that you can attend to your weed pressure, keeping the sunlight out, and attend to the building of the soil system again, is actually keeping living roots and rotating those living roots. Because I guess one of the great things around the synthropic system is this continual dynamic pulsation of photosynthesis and sap, essentially. So getting things out that are have come to the end of their life cycle and replacing them with something that's at the beginning of their life cycle, or or you know, in the instance of annuals, perennials and trees, actually cutting them to you know, expedite sap production. But
and it's the idea of maximum harvest of carbon at the same time producing like that vigorous growth. We all did the course. So cool.
So are you looking at, you know, what are your thoughts around that, Anna? Are you looking at, because to get started, you don't need to spend a lot of money to get a reasonable amount of, you know, seedlings underway. And in fact, Levi's got a great Instagram on the Regenerate Now of a very simple, cost-effective seed raising propagation house that he's created at home that might be worth having a look at, for example.
Yeah.
Where are you at with your seedling production area?
Well, I built a little plastic house, which was actually fantastic over lockdown, and just out of used plastic from the insulation that we used in our house. So it's very, very makeshift, and the frame is pallets, and it's got 2 shelves in it. So it's a very temporary situation, but it's been great. But I was looking at a location for a hothouse, probably not as big as the one at OMG, but that we could plant vegetables in there during winter, and that would be my seed raising and seedling and cutting space, and maybe putting it underneath the persimmons so it's got shade in summer, because it would just get too hot. And a lot of the seeds, I've been using up all the seeds that I've been saving for the last few years, and a lot of them are not viable anymore, so I've just kind of been chucking them about and seeing what comes up, and basically just trying to get rid of everything I've got so I can start afresh. So it would be initially purchasing from King's, probably, maybe look at other, if there are some local producers of organic seed, and joining a seed swap. Kind of
I can send you some, I'll send you a seed package. I've got so many seeds, so I'll send you a gift package.
I think because my growing was just so disappointing, I was like, I'm just going to put all my energy into establishing the systems so that I can start growing in spring, and I'd pretty much just wiped out this season. But yeah,
Okay.
get some compost going is a priority.
Putting the greenhouse underneath the persimmon trees is an awesome idea for the shade, and that my only comment on that would be the plastic material that you use, if it's a traditional hoop house, is pretty strong, but during a storm you wouldn't want a branch to fall through it. It could give you more headaches than it's worth. So my question was, is the gap between the persimmon trees wide enough? Because it would just create another job of having to make sure that the edge is quite well pruned. Yeah, would be my only comment. Other than that, I love it, but if the gap's wide enough, that would be awesome. But if it's straight underneath them, it's just a consideration.
Yeah, no, got to do some more analysis on potential sites.
Really, as well, I think the another amazing reflection from the syntropic farming movement is that they, because of time considerations and a whole lot of things, they grow a lot of plants that just grow from cuttings that you can just bash in the ground. And I think it's really important, you know, like when we were up there, the Tithonia and sugarcane and all those species, you just want to get them established in some area as being a vigorous plant that you can then, at the right time of year, just create 100 others from by simply just sticking them in the ground. And we were talking about that before as well, just, you know, like globe artichokes, Jerusalem artichokes. If you did want to sell seedlings, plant as many of them as you can now, because then that's your future. You know, that's really solid. You can make a few $100 every season off that, no problem. $5 a season.
So Anna, we're going to run out of time, and I want to make sure that we, I guess you were talking, asking about, what are the things that you kind of need to get you started. And I guess I would be saying to you, if you're going to be spending any money at the moment, I'd be spending it on compost to actually get you, rather than waiting for compost that you make yourself, because that's going to take 2 to 3 months. There's a real opportunity at the moment to really get as many things in the ground as possible. It's going to be raining. I don't know what your water usage is right, but get potatoes in the ground. Get as much stuff in the ground as you can now, because that's going to put you in good stead. So I'd be focusing on purchasing some compost, getting some good seeds, getting some really good cover crops, getting your seedling production up so that you've got stuff to get back into the ground as soon as those cover crops are kind of ready to be chopped. And so you're planting straight into them. And they're really just focusing on that very simple system at the moment of building soil using an initial inoculant being your compost, and then your photosynthesis production, essentially, with being able to bring that stuff on stream. And obviously, one of the ways that we can kind of boost our photosynthesis production and our microbial is through many means, but you have mentioned the biologic step 1, step 2, and step 3 and 4. You've also potentially put in here an aerator, and that's really for when you kind of got the other stuff happening and you want to look at potentially brewing your own microbial teas. But that's a whole nother layer of skill, and I think just to get yourself started, you really focus on the stuff that you can do now, and get those systems in place. And then let's look at potentially doing a masterclass around brewing your own microbial inoculant and liquid fertilizer teas, because it's a relatively skilled thing to do well. Obviously, a lot of us are using comfrey teas and worm teas, and they do have certain things in them, but you're wanting to really remediate your soil as quickly as possible to get really, good plant growth in a time of the year where there's rain, which, in the north, it's not a guarantee that you'll have that in summer. And I know for us, even for myself, where I am, I've got tomato plants in already that are flowering and doing quite well. And, I think we need to be starting to think a little bit more creatively about what times of the year we actually grow things on, and actually look at our actual microclimates and seeing what supports what when. And again, for you to get through the next summer, you're going to want to have as many things deep rooted as possible, as much cover as possible. So what are some of the cover crops that you could be getting in now that potentially are also going to produce food for you, and are something maybe that you can trade? So broad beans are a great one. What are some of the other things that you might recommend, Levi?
Yeah, I was just thinking while you were talking then, Sarah, I am quite sure in my belief that I've never, like, there is the way of starting a vegetable garden, or like we talk about it as starting an urban farm straight away by putting compost on and then planting veg straight into the compost. But personally, I've always, if you have the time and if you're not desperate to get vegetables on the ground that you can sell because that's what you want to do, if you have time to work with that and you really want to work on developing a microbially diverse soil, you want to start with some compost and buy as much of that in as you can. But every garden that I make from now on, and every garden that how we've done the whole farm was, you started off a new garden bed, you've got virgin untouched soil, and then you go straight into a diverse cover crop with a minimum of 12 to 30 different species, and you feed those species, you feed that cover crop quite intensely the biologic steps, okay? Because just to do compost and then do broad beans or plant even a veggie garden, It's diverse, but it's not that diverse. Okay, you can get way more diverse with a cover crop, and as well, just have a couple of gaps in it and do a row of veggies straight through it.
Yeah.
Really, that's the best way to start off. If you got any fruit trees, like, you can get going straight away. You got any trees you want to plant? You got any, like a row of Jerusalem artichokes, for instance? Like, if you get them now, lay them down and plant your globe artichokes, and plant your or say you've got some mandarin trees or whatever you've got, all your perennials amongst it. Once that cover crop dies off, boom, you've already planned the second stage of growth. But really, I'd look at starting every new patch with a cover crop, and feeding that cover crop, one with compost, and two with the microbial sprays, because that way nothing builds soil better and biological life in soil better than diverse living plants, and supporting that initial cover crop with the beneficials is just going to get you off to the best start possible, as well as getting rid of your weeds.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in terms of species, look at all your nitrogen fixers. As Sarah said, like, there's so many nitrogen fixtures that are edible. You can plant lupins, but man, just this time of year, I'd go with broad beans, and in the summer, why not just borlotti beans, straight normal beans? There's a lot you can do, and then from that you can develop an incredible seed bank from your cover crops as well. Daikon radish is a great one as well, just to get the brassicas in there, and always clover. Yeah, clover's really nice. You can plant a super diverse cover crop out. If you include crimson clover, white clover, or red clover in that, quite often, sort of 3-4 months later, when your main species of cover crop have died off, your buckwheats, your mustards, your daikons, whatever you've got, your lupins, underneath all that, if you come through and just cleanly chop it off, if you put enough clover seed in, you just have a clover come through. And it's really good. Yeah.
And you can plant into that. Just literally create a hole to put your seedling in. Then you've got your seedlings good to go, and you're obviously making sure that you're introducing those microbes through the step 2 right at the beginning of the process. I'm just having a look if there's anything else that we absolutely haven't covered. Anna?
Any questions, Anna? Any major things?
Just gonna review. I think you've covered predominantly everything I wanted to discuss.
Cool.
Because it's really like
in the beginning, like I'd work right now on establishing perennial borders and lines as fast as possible. Get rid of that mulch chip, redistribute it, plant cover crops in patches as much as you can, and compost right in the heart of where you want a new growing area to emerge from.
Yeah.
So we're going to wrap this up, but we didn't get to see your garden today, Anna, but we did get to visit you and to have a conversation and while you're in the north. But we are going to be able to watch your Instagram takeover this week, and where you'll be able to take us to each of the different parts of your site, show us what you're doing, give us a sense of potentially the ecosystem that you're in, and it's been really it's been a really fun conversation today. Particularly, we often, it's wonderful having Daniel around because he can take us into these very deep dives, but it's also great to know that we can survive without him, and that we are building within our community a level of knowledge that means that we are useful to each other. And as I say, it's just always a delight, Levi, to see each time we have a conversation, your capacity in terms of being an enabler and a teacher and a sharer in this space just continues to grow, and that's just a wonderful thing. And for all of you who have, who do watch this, that's what we are really committed to becoming, a very diverse, dense, complex community of practitioners who together create resilience for our neighbourhoods and our country, where we're using the capacity of photosynthesis to really restore our local, hyperlocal worlds, but also our planet. So unless there's anything else for us to share, I'd like maybe to hear from you, Anna, as to, hasn't been exactly what you expected, but has this still been a useful conversation?
Yes, I have a really clear plan, and I'm actually quite excited about redoing that whole garden, because I know that my previous sheet mulching energy that's gone into it will have prepared it beautifully to grow in. So I'm halfway there.
Yeah, no, totally.
Absolutely.
Totally. Yeah, no, it's not. It's a valid strategy. It's just you couldn't start. Yeah.
2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah.
3 steps forward.
You haven't done any. That's like not. It's not a stupid thing to do. It's something that's recommended by so many people. But what you have to do is scrape it all back.
So that's it from us.
Thank you so much.
We're really looking forward to your first Instagram post, Anna. It's going to be a wonderful week.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to showing you all the rest of the garden when I'm online.
Thank you.
Thank you.